Shabbat shalom todos. As usual, it's easiest for me to speak in English, so I do my best to give you the main points on the notes there. La traducción no es perfecto, but it's más o menos good enough. It's good enough. So I'll do my best to maybe speak a little slower. Sometimes I tend to get excited and speak a little quickly, which I know for myself when I'm hearing Spanish makes it more difficult, right? So I'll do my best to speak with a little bit slower. So this week's Parasha, Chayei, and the Haftarah that we read, the Hadashah, they all have this in very important theme and connection, and that's faithful choices, the choices and action that were made because of faith. And it was by no means on purpose that the direction of my teaching today was meant to kind of leave Sarah out. It just, as I was going through and studying and things this week, I noticed this connection between all the readings in Sarah's life. That's what, Chayei Sarah, the life of Sarah, is very profound and has so much to it that could obviously be its own teaching, but just for whatever reason, the direction went somewhere else this week. And so, starting with, these faithful choices that require action, we're going to start from Abraham, that we see what happens here, to all the way to what Yeshua talks about in the Hadashah. And so, something that's kind of an interesting thing to point out here is that in the beginning of this portion here, this Torah portion, we see that, Abraham is burying his wife, is burying Sarah. And the word here that's used for like a burial site or burial is kevat in Hebrew, in Hebrew. And it shares the same root of the word with mikveh. And if any of you remember, if you listened or heard or remember from a few weeks ago when I talked about the meaning of mikveh, it means to gather, to hope, but also implies this confident expectation and hope and waiting. And so I think that's just very interesting that this word that's used here, kevat, it has this connection that suggests, of course, that burial is not an end, right? It is a step towards something else. It is a step towards eternal hope. And then also, we know what happens in the generations that come. So it's solidifying this legacy that's being left through the life of Sarah for generations to come. Okay? And so, like, when I was reading and studying this week, I came upon an insight from a sage, Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch. And he talks about the importance and the insistence that Abraham had on purchasing this land, rather than like accepting somewhere else or a place as like a gift for this land. But the purchase of it teaches the importance of taking responsibility for our actions for our spiritual legacy. And as I said, with like the burial site, this was one of the first steps in doing that. And to connect that with the purpose that Abraham has been given, this mission, the divine mission that Abraham has been given, I wanted to point out something about the Hebrew language. If you're not familiar with what's called gematria, it's basically a way to see that each letter, phrase, word, name, they have a value. There's like a numerological system, these numbers that are assigned to different letters and phrases and names. And a lot of times it's used to give more insight, to understand deeper, and to interpret Jewish texts. And especially in context of like Kabbalistic views of things. And so the number 400, he purchased this burial site for Sarah. The number 400 corresponds in the Hebrew, for the Hebrew letter Tav. And the letter Tav is the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And so I feel like it's just a great representation of the life of Sarah being purchased for this 400 shekels, silver shekels, and that the fact that 400 is representing the completion or totality, right? Completion. That's what Tav 400 tends to represent. And so it's I think it's very profound just to know that like it represents that completion, the fulfillment of Sarah's earthly journey, right? With Abraham's faith in God's promises. I think it's a very interesting to see that. And something else I found in the Talmud this week is that it explains that the cave where he purchased this burial site, the Machpelah, the cave that he purchased at, isn't just a burial ground. They believe it is actually the gateway to Gan Eden, to the Garden of Eden. And even more interesting about that, with this name, looking at more meaning and depth to things, right, is that Machpelah, it also means double. So the name of the burial site, or the cave that he buried at, Machpelah, means double. So I feel like this kind of hints at this layered, like spiritual significance to where he's buried her. It has both an earthly and a heavenly significance. And something that is important to point out that's being described here is that if you're not familiar with where this is at, where the burial would have taken place, right now in present day, it's not considered by politics or whatever, like geography considered Israel, but it is Israel, right, where this happened. So what's happening here is the purchase of this burial site that Abraham made the purchase for Sarah is the very first step in establishing a foothold or a foundation for the Jewish people as the rightful owners of the promised land, of Israel. So this was Abraham's faithful action here in this portion of the reading. The next one I want to look at here is the servant's faithfulness and his action. And I feel like the servant's part in this teaching today could be easily overlooked. I feel like it's not something that I originally saw it as, and I feel like it could be easily glossed over, okay? But if we look at it carefully through the lens of this connection I'm trying to make here of faithful choices, then what we can see is the servant had an amazing deep faith. And why I say that is the first example in Genesis chapter 24, verse 11, where it starts with him. He shows up after being given this mission, given this command from his master, from Abraham, to go find the wife. And when he shows up, it says it was evening. Well, it implies with the word that's used, it's like it's getting dark, right? So in Jewish tradition, that's the end of the day. Well, he says to answer his request and let me succeed today. So he's expecting a very quick response to this prayer. He's not saying let it happen sometime. He's literally at the end of the day, arriving here, and he makes this prayer, and it's the end of the day, right? And talking about an incredibly speedy request, right? Like he's expecting this to happen right here, and so he could either be perceived, it could be said, right? He's being arrogant, right? But my hopeful answer and insight to this is that he was faithfully expectant on this answer to happen, for the prayer to be answered. And we have to remember, at this time, the Torah had not been revealed. The Torah, they didn't have the Torah and commandments and things to follow. But even with that, the sages, almost all sages agree upon, and the Jewish scholars and things, that they credit Abraham and the forefathers and the patriarchs with following all the precepts, all the principles of Torah spiritually. Now, whether that means they actually followed it to the letter by commandments, that's not what they're saying. Some say that's what it is, but they're at least agreeing that the patriarchs follow the Torah's precepts, the principles that it rests upon. And so Abraham did not need Torah's direction to get closer to Hashem, because he already had in a direct path, an established close relationship with him. And the reason I point that out is that the servant's faithfulness that he had in making this prayer and going on this mission, I like to call it, is that it is directly tied to the fact that he was a close follower. He was around. He was the servant, the confidant of Abraham. And Abraham, who was described as a friend, as God's friend, even Isaiah calls Abraham God's friend. Abraham's profound faith in relationship with Hashem would have very much affected the servant's mindset, like his outlook, particularly in matters of prayer and trust and faith in Hashem. So, another thing to point out is that I think is another interesting thing, looking at the Hebrew language, is that the word for the type of servant that's used for them in this reading is eved. And it shares the exact same roots with avodah. And avodah is worship or service. So this connection, I feel like, knowing that they have the same root word, which I don't think there's any mistakes in when you see these connections in the Hebrew language. It emphasizes the servant's loyalty, the fact that he would do anything for his master, and he listened and was obedient. But his loyalty to Abraham was not just like this practical, functional thing, but it was also spiritual, right? This ties to Abraham. And the servant's boldness in his prayer is not arrogance. It is a reflection of the environment that he lived in, which was Abraham's faith was not like a theory or something that he had just heard of. He lived through it. This servant was with him through all the miracles that he saw, through all the direct encounters that Abraham would have had with God. So the servant living in the presence of a man such as Abraham would inspire that confidence in God and Hashem, in knowing that God is both near and he's incredibly responsive. He saw that in Abraham's relationship. So what can we learn from the servant's faith here? Well, the servant's prayer reflects that he had a learned trust. He lived that experience. He had a learned trust. And he saw Abraham call on God countless times whether to intercede and with Sodom or to seek guidance, and he witnessed how God answered faithfully to Abraham. And being close to Abraham gave this servant a faith through that lived experience, a faith born not of texts from the Torah that we have today. And it's not considered, it's not in the most important thing still today, but it's not through the text from the Torah we have today, but it was through a lived relationship. And so one thing that the sages teach and is that when we align our will with God's will, our prayers carry extraordinary power. Okay? So that was the servant's faithful choices and faithfulness. Then we go on and we see Rebekah's faithfulness. And Rebekah made a decision to leave her family, leave her land, and go with Abraham's servant. And she made this decision on very limited information in very little time. An incredibly big decision she made with a little bit of information. And why do you think, though, that she made such a huge decision to go with such a short time? Well, I believe that she, being just like the servant in close proximity to Abraham, being close to Abraham, that it gave him a profound faith and trust. And so Rebekah, just like the servant saw Abraham and got his faith through that, now Rebekah is seeing the servants and is seeing the faith expressed through the servant's dedication and loyalty to the master in fulfilling this divine promise. And I think that was the key to this. And so what I mean by that is she saw how serious the servant was when he came and met her. And she saw him prostrate and get down and worship and bless the Lord because he answered that prayer quick, right? He says, give me the sign, and he tells exactly what he wants the sign to be. Rebekah comes and fulfills exactly that. And so right away, he gets down and blesses the Lord, and she sees how sincere he is. She must be seeing how much this is affecting him to see this was answered. And so I think between seeing that, of course, he gave a bunch of gifts on behalf of Abraham and that sort of thing, which also implies some very serious things to it in terms of that they really wanted this to happen. And then also he goes in with the family, he's invited in, and they want to feed him. And he says, no, I won't even eat until I've told you exactly why I'm here. So he means business. He is serious, right? And they're seeing this. And Rebekah is seeing this happen before her. And so when asked whether she will go with Abraham's servant, she says, I will go. I will go. And, her family even was like, well, let her wait here. She can go, but let her wait here for 7 to 10 days. And he says, no, don't let me make my master wait on an answer. And Rebekah just is I'll go. I will go. And this immediate response that Rebekah has to this, what do you think that kind of mirrors? I feel like it mirrors Abraham's willingness to leave his homeland that we saw in Genesis chapter 12. Both of these examples had to exhibit this complete trust in God's will, in his plan. And both moments required these people, Rebekah and Abraham, They had to leave behind comfort, security, where they were at, the familiarity of where they lived and were doing things. Like they had to do that and step into the unknown and go into uncertainty with a trust in God. So that, I think is an amazing thing that we're seeing, just like the fact that she made this decision with what seems like very little information, but I feel like the information she was using was so profound that she was using to make this decision. So there was Rebecca's faithful actions that we see, the choices she made. Now, the next one, we see this connection between Sarah and David in the Kings, First Kings that we read from the Haftarah this week. And so both Sarah and David represent these transitions into leadership or legacy. Sarah's death marks the shift to the next generation that we see, while David's final actions are ensuring, they're making sure that Solomon will reign. And I love that the cyclical nature that we see a lot of time in God's covenants, that each generation must take its steps to secure their future. And the Haftarah parallels the Parasha that we read from with another story of succession in faithfulness. So King David he's old at this point when we're reading, and there's this like power struggle that's happening between Adonijah and Solomon for the throne. And if they would have done kind of what society, like the people wanted, it seemed as though it was Adonijah would have taken that. But Bathsheba and the prophet Nathan, they intervene and they want to make sure that God's plan continues to be fulfilled. And so they ensure that Solomon is anointed king, as David had promised. And so the key point here is that just as Abraham ensured Isaac's place in the covenant, and David's supporters ensured David's supporters ensured Solomon's rightful place on the throne. These kind of parallels with that. And this reflects that theme of faithful obedience to God's established plan that he has for his people, even in the face of human ambition. We saw Adonijah kind of really having a power struggle, and the people kind of wanting for Adonijah to be king. But even in the face of human ambition and society's ambition, we see faithful obedience. And David, like Abraham, takes these intentional steps to secure God's promises for the next generation. And so this important connection is that these narratives focus on that continuation of God's covenant through faithful heirs, the next in line, right? Emphasizing the importance of this spiritual inheritance when we see the divine purpose, that these things that kind of have to happen. And then when we see the next set of things, in the Brit Hadashah, for what Yeshua talks about for following him. We see in Matthew, Yeshua was approached, these two individuals, would-be disciples, expressed. They said that they want to follow him. And his responses show the commitment and sacrifice that have to happen in faithful choices that we're talking about today. Yeshua says, the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. And Yeshua emphasizes here, he's talking about the cost. He's talking about what would have to be sacrificed. And the cost of discipleship, requiring his followers to give up security, to give up comfort, right? Maybe reputation. He's talking about the cost. And then again, this parallels these faithful choices that we're seeing, like Rebecca's choice, where she left her family and home to join Isaac. Both decisions require giving up something, the stability, the comfort, to trust in God's plan. Yeshua's words in the next part, follow me and let the dead bury their own dead. They are emphasizing, they're really noting the importance and the urgency of prioritizing God's plan and call, prioritizing it over society and family obligations even. I mean, he's telling these people that you don't even have time to bury your own dead, you know? So this is again, like it's just like reflecting these decisions like Abraham and Rebecca, made that where they just had to dig up. They had to move forward and follow the plan. And the main takeaway from this portion from the Big Hadashah is that faithful choices oftentimes are going to involve costs. They're going to cost something generally. Leaving behind comfort, leaving behind security, or not living up to society's expectations or standards. Usually, these faithful choices are going to demand prioritizing God's call or God's purpose and trusting that He will guide and He will provide. If He's making a plan and you're following through it, He will provide and He will guide you through that. And so, in the next portion we read from Lucas, we read about this Roman officer, sometimes referred to as a centurion. And he's also demonstrating, showing this remarkable faith in Yeshua's authority, in the belief of Yeshua. He says, just say the word, and my servant will be healed. His faith rests upon that recognition of Yeshua's ability. And just like the servant had confidence in Hashem to provide the wife for Isaac, the Roman army officer had confidence in Yeshua to heal his servant. So, to put these things, to re-summarize, like what we see here today in these connections is that faithful choices require action. They require action. And faith is demonstrated. Our level of faith is demonstrated through action. We saw Abraham's servant, his prayerful request for guidance was followed by an immediate action. He didn't sit back and wait for answers. He actively sought God's will by observing Rebecca's actions, paying attention to what she was doing to make sure that it fulfilled the actions at the well. You see Rebecca, who said, I will go. She had a declaration of faith right there that required her to act, leaving behind her old life for a new, unknown one. We see the Roman officer, where he could have doubted Yeshua's ability to heal from a distance, because he even said, don't come in my house. I'm not worthy, he sends his friends to go and tell Yeshua. And even with that, he had to have this trust, and that was a faithful action to make a willingness to follow him. And then the would-be disciples that we read about in Matthew, the two men, Yeshua's response is showing, it implies that that while their initial interest was commendable, oh great, you want to follow me, okay, let's lock them. True discipleship, really following, requires action, and it's a willingness to follow him despite the cost, no matter what. So the key takeaways from all of this, is that faithful choices, they're not some passive thing. Like they require action, they require movement, they require to do something. And often doing something in the face of the unknown or uncertainty. And faith is demonstrated in our willingness to make that step forward and move forward. trusting Hashem to direct our steps. And so one thing I wanted to say some words from a teacher I heard a few years ago that really had a profound effect on me in terms of faith. And his title of this teaching that I'm going to read a portion from is called, like, what is authentic faith? And he says, what is authentic faith? The cultivation of an optimistic outlook on life with a kind of spirituality attached to it, a holy hoping for the best. Is this how you think of faith? Authentic faith is the confident assurance in events not yet seen. Faith is not a call to believe in things when common sense tells you not to. Faith is not a mindless stab in the dark. It's not a crossing of the fingers and hoping for the best. It's not a leap into apparent nothingness. Faith is a word that speaks of reasoned, careful, deliberate, intentional thoughts. And what are those thoughts upon? God and all of his promises. So if you're absolutely gripped by the coming realities that have been promised to you by God, then how you live your life today in the present will be radically, drastically different than if you did not have that certainty. This is what faith is, my friends. Positive certainty expressed in action. Authentic faith is not merely believing in God. It's believing God and all of his promises, taking God at his word, because his speaking is his doing, living in obedience to his revelation at whatever the cost, because you know deep down in your bones that God will always do what he says. It is an abiding assurance in God and his promises that animates you to persevere in obedience to him. So again, those are not my words from that. I wish I had that much eloquence in my speaking, but I find that so profound. And let me repeat it again. In the one word, the one line that got to me the most is that authentic faith is not merely believing in God, right? It is believing God in all of his promises. And I think that's a very profound statement, because a lot of people can claim to believe in Hashem and in God, but actually living your life as though his promises are real. It is not just like a possibility, like these are legitimate promises. And as it says, like, your life will be drastically different if that's a certainty you have. So through some of these connections that I spoke about today, we see that God's promises, they're not only spiritual, but also demand action and commitment in this world today. And let these lessons that we've seen today from these different examples inspire you to follow God's call with unwavering faith, right? Deep faith, just like we saw a model in today's readings. So thank you, everybody. Shabbat shalom.